Nobody was watching when he woke up in the dark. The orphanage was silent except for the sound of his own breathing and the distant call of a bird. Outside the window, Aryan was 7 years old, but he moved through the darkness like someone twice his age, careful, deliberate, knowing exactly where each step would take him. The grey light of dawn hadn't yet broken through the gaps in the old wooden walls. He didn't need it to. He'd walked this path 100 times before. His feet touched the cold floor. His small hands reached for the bucket by his bed. Water, always water first. He splashed his face and felt the shock of it, felt alive for another day. The kitchen was 3 rooms away, and that's where he needed to be. That's where breakfast wouldn't make itself. That's where the younger children would arrive soon, hungry and half awake, looking for someone to pour their milk, to cut their bread, to make them feel like someone cared they existed. He was 7, and this was already his purpose. At 7 years old, Aryan didn't know it yet, but every small choice he was about to make would ripple through years, touching lives he'd never meet. And it all started with a single decision that morning. Aryan had lost his mother when he was 5. A fever. She'd been burning, and then she wasn't breathing anymore. His father tried to keep him after that, tried to hold everything together with broken hands and a grief that made him disappear into himself. But 2 years later, his father came to this orphanage on a morning that felt like every other morning. Except he didn't come back. Aryan didn't cry that day. He'd already learned that tears change nothing. He was the kind of boy nobody picked first. Not because he wasn't good, not because he wasn't worthy, but because he was too quiet to demand attention. While other children screamed their pain into the world, Aryan turned his inward. He watched. He noticed. He learned that if you pay attention to what needs doing, you become indispensable. Not because anyone thanks you, but because you can't live with yourself if you don't. The other kids acted out. They rebelled. They demanded love through noise and disruption. Aryan did the opposite. He loved silently through action. He made breakfast. He braided hair. He listened to nightmares whispered in the dark. While others were waiting to be rescued, Aryan was learning to rescue himself. But Aryan's quietness wasn't weakness. It was the soil where something remarkable was growing. And every single day, his routine revealed what others couldn't see. Aryan made tea for Mrs. Sharma, the caretaker. Her hands were arthritis bent, and the kitchen was a difficult place. He'd learned to move through it silently, leaving the tea steaming by her bed before she even woke. Then came the younger children. He helped them dress. Their small fingers couldn't manage buttons, so his did. He shared his breakfast, a cup of rice and lentils, with a boy named Ravi who didn't have to ask anymore. Asking was beneath them now. This was simply what Aryan did. School was different. There, among children with homes and parents waiting at gates, he sat in the front row and absorbed everything. His shoes had holes in the soles. His uniform was patched, but his mind was sharp and his teacher saw it. He returned to the orphanage each afternoon and helped with chores, floors, laundry, cooking. The work was endless, and he moved through it like water through a channel. Necessary, expected, unnoticed, this rhythm became his life. Love expressed through action, not words. But as time passed, something began to worry him. The more he gave, the more he wondered. Was he becoming indispensable, or was he just disappearing? He didn't know it, but every act of service was building something inside him. Until one day, the weight of invisibility became too much to carry alone. By 13, Aryan had become essential. His teachers praised him. The younger children followed him like he was their North Star. Mrs. Sharma depended on him for everything. He excelled in school, scored highest in his class, earned scholarships. Everything he'd built through quiet service was working. Everything except the one thing that mattered. Someone seeing him and choosing him. Then came the announcement. The orphanage was closing. Budget cuts. Government consolidation. In 6 months, all children would be dispersed to different institutions or adopted, or left to figure it out themselves. The news hit the orphanage like a stone dropped into still water. Other children screamed. Some cried. Some acted out in sudden rage, as if chaos might change the outcome. Aryan went silent, quieter than usual. That night, he sat alone in the kitchen, the place where he'd spent thousands of hours serving others, and felt the cold truth settle in his chest. Nobody was coming for him. No family. No relative appearing with open arms. His invisibility, which he'd worn like armor, suddenly felt like a prison. He thought, what if I'm not enough? What if all this giving means nothing? What if I've spent years loving people, and in the end, I'm still alone? Days became a countdown. Families arrived, looked around, and chose. A boy with a quick smile, a girl with bright eyes. Aryan stood at the window and watched them leave. Some children cried with joy. Some left grateful. Each departure felt like confirmation of something he'd always suspected but never dared speak aloud. I am not the kind of person people choose. The spiral started quietly. Maybe I've wasted these years. Maybe giving doesn't matter. Maybe I should have demanded attention instead of giving it away. He stopped helping as much, stopped volunteering in the kitchen. It was a test, though he didn't call it that. Would anyone notice? Would anyone care if he disappeared? The answer came back silently, devastatingly. No. Mrs. Sharma gave him space. The staff moved on. Independence, someone said, was Aryan's greatest strength, as if strength meant the same thing as alone. Then Ravi. The boy he'd shared his breakfast with for years, the boy he'd held through nightmares, got adopted. Ravi left without saying goodbye. Aryan realized I gave him everything I had, and he doesn't even think of me anymore. Independence, he now understood, was just another word for abandoned. He was invisible not because he was quiet. He was invisible because he wasn't worth seeing. But then, something unexpected happened. And it came from the person Aryan least expected to understand him. The kitchen was empty now, not just of people, but of purpose. Aryan sat on the floor where he'd spent thousands of mornings making breakfast for children. Who'd forgotten him the moment they left? His throat felt tight. His eyes burned. And then, quietly, the tears came. Not the dramatic kind that announced themselves. The quiet kind. The kind that come from a well so deep you didn't know it existed until it ran dry. He thought, I should stop. Stop trying. Stop being kind. Stop giving to people who don't give back. It doesn't change anything. It never did. That night, alone in the darkness, he made a decision. When I leave this place, I'll be different. I'll take instead of give. I'll demand instead of serve. I'll become the person who gets noticed, no matter the cost. I'll harden myself. I'll survive. He didn't cry after that. His face went blank. His heart went numb. He decided to break himself before the world could do it for him. Tomorrow he'd leave. Tomorrow he'd become someone else. Someone who couldn't be hurt because he wouldn't let anyone close enough to matter. It was his lowest moment. The moment his beautiful spirit nearly shattered. But that morning, before he could leave, an old woman appeared at the orphanage door, and she changed everything. Her name was Mrs. Kapoor. She came to the orphanage once a month to teach the children skills, sewing, cooking, basic literacy. But this time, she didn't greet everyone. She came directly to Aryan. Mrs. Sharma had mentioned his withdrawal, his isolation, his decision to leave. Mrs. Kapoor sat beside him on the floor where he'd made his decision to harden himself. And she didn't ask him to talk. She simply said, I knew a boy like you once. He thought his invisibility meant he wasn't valuable. He was very wrong. Aryan felt skeptical. He'd heard kind words before. They changed nothing. She continued quietly. I'm starting a school in the village for children who have no one. I need someone to help me build it. Not as charity work, as a partner. I've watched you for years. I know who you are. She asked him a question then. Who taught the little ones to read before the school came? His voice was small. I did. She nodded slowly. And nobody clapped for you, did they? That teaching was real. The world doesn't always applaud the people doing the most important work. But that doesn't make the work any less important. It makes it more important. For the first time, Aryan's kindness wasn't weakness. It was vision. It was qualification. She offered him something he never expected, a future where his gentleness wasn't a liability. It was his qualification. Over the next weeks, something shifted inside Aryan. He began working with Mrs. Kapoor, helping her establish the school, and with each day, his perspective changed. One evening, she sat across from him and said something that rewired everything he believed about his own life. Your poverty taught you abundance. Your invisibility taught you to see others. Your abandonment taught you loyalty. He felt it land like a key turning in a lock. Every struggle he'd carried, the forced independence, the attention to need, the ability to love without expecting return, these weren't punishments. They were his education. While other children were learning entitlement, Aryan had learned leadership. While others waited for rescue, he'd learned to rescue himself. Mrs. Kapoor showed him something then. Letters, children from other villages she taught, writing about transformations in their lives. Every letter mentioned someone like Aryan, someone who saw them, someone who loved them without condition. They credited their entire turnaround to kindness received from people who'd learned early. That love was a choice. Aryan read the letters and felt the question shift inside him. No longer, why was I abandoned? Instead, what was I prepared for? The lotus grows in mud, not in marble. But nobody ever questions its beauty. His curse had become his crown, his pain, his qualification. And then, Aryan didn't just understand this truth intellectually. He watched it play out in real time. 1 year into working with Mrs. Kapoor, their small school had 40 children, all of them invisible to the world, all of them hungry for someone to see them. Aryan knew their names, their fears, their dreams. He remembered which girl was afraid of math and which boy needed encouragement to speak. Within 3 years, 200 children. Within 10, the organization expanded to 3 villages. Aryan had earned a scholarship to university, studied education, come back with credentials and vision. Now, 15 years later, 5,000 children across 3 states had been touched by schools built on a single principle: seeing people. But here's what mattered most. Walk into any of his classrooms and you'd feel it immediately, a space where every child mattered, where invisibility ended. Aryan moved through these rooms with calm confidence and genuine presence. The desperate kindness of a boy seeking validation had transformed into the rooted generosity of a man at peace. He'd learned that love didn't require return to be real. Some of his earliest students had become teachers themselves. They saw children the way Aryan had seen them. The pattern repeated, generation after generation. What could have been a life of bitterness if he'd broken that night became instead a legacy of seeing, of mattering, of belonging. The question he once asked in darkness had been answered 1,000 times over. But the most beautiful part of this story isn't Aryan's achievement. It's what he realized about why it happened. At 30 years old, Aryan sat with a group of new mentors he was training and spoke quietly. I spent my childhood feeling like I had nothing, but I had everything that mattered. I had the capacity to see another person and make them feel less alone. I learned early and hard that love isn't measured by what you receive. It's measured by what you choose to give anyway. He paused. The room was completely still. The people who change the world aren't usually the ones with the most resources. They're the ones who learned early that their resources are their attention, their presence, their belief in others. And that's enough. Your invisibility isn't your curse. It's your clarity. Because you learned to see others. And that seeing is a superpower. It wasn't easy. He told them. There were nights he wanted to give up. But he was grateful for every one of those nights. Because they taught him who he was. They taught him that what was meant to break him made him instead. What was meant to diminish him deepened him. That wasn't luck. That was alchemy. The people nobody is watching become the people who save everyone. Because they learned early that love is a choice, not a reward. His pain had become his qualification. His wound had become his wisdom. If you've ever felt invisible, like you're giving more than you're getting, like nobody sees how hard you're trying, I want you to hear this, that invisibility is not your failure. It might be your training ground. You're learning something that privileged people never have to learn. You're learning to create value instead of demand it. You're learning to love without guarantee of return. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of greatness. Feeling invisible isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It might be a sign that you're doing something real. You don't need the world to validate your worth for it to be real. In fact, the only place real confidence comes from is believing in yourself before anyone else does. Your struggle isn't punishment. It's preparation. Every invisible act of kindness you perform is training you for something bigger than yourself. Today, choose one small act of kindness that nobody will see. Do it anyway, not for recognition, for yourself, for the person you're becoming. Decide right now that your pain has a purpose, that your invisibility is teaching you something the world desperately needs. Because people who've learned this, they change everything, and the world is waiting for people like you. 15 years later, Aryan stands in a schoolyard named after Mrs. Kapoor. Hundreds of students surround him. Teachers he's trained, children he's seen. Across the school, this moment repeats. In every classroom, in every conversation, the practice of making invisible people visible. This is what happens when one person believes in the worth of another. It ripples, it multiplies, it changes generations. You are not the sum of your circumstances. You are the sum of how you choose to respond to them. And your choice matters infinitely more than your situation. If this story is yours, if you know what it's like to be unseen, pass this forward. Tell someone today that you see them, that their life matters. It's okay to believe in yourself before anyone else does. That's not arrogance. That's wisdom. Aryan's hand rests on the girl's shoulder. Her eyes bright, seen. And in that image lives the answer to every question about whether invisibility ever truly matters. It does, because you do.